Your next movie is actually one that we dived into in detail last year, but I am so curious to hear your take on it because we were split and didn't know
Mm.
what to make of it. What did you think? Let us know.
Yeah, the movie Happiest Season. Kristen Stewart, who is, my wife, who is unfortunately getting married to a real life wife. Um,
It's unfortunate.
yeah. Mm. But it is basically a Hallmark Christmas movie starring a lesbian couple. And it was received, as you said, to mixed reviews and stuff because the entire plot of it is that the Harper, the woman that Kristen Stewart is in a relationship with, hasn't come out to her family yet, and she sort of springs this on her partner on the way to the family's house and stuff. And it's sort of they think you're my roommate rather than my girlfriend, which is admittedly kind of a terrible spot to put somebody
Sure. Yeah.
in a lot of ways. Um, and it goes from there. There are the usual like Christmas hijinks and stuff, but a lot of it is, will Harper come out and will it turn out okay?
Mm-hmm.
In a lot of ways. And it's one that, like for me watching it as a queer person, it felt like, oh, thank goodness, there's a Christmas movie that includes us, that acknowledges that
Sure.
we exist, and that
We also get a shitty Hallmark movie.
yeah, yeah, that's the sort of thing. It's not one that that I'm like, oh, this is representative of my experience or anything, because I've never been the child of a politician in a small town, that sort of thing. But it hits on a lot of those tropes that are common in straight Hallmark movies, in movies featuring heterosexual couples, and it feels kind of good to be included in that genre in a lot of ways, even though like we can take a sex positive lens to it and say like, okay, this is not like a necessarily healthy relationship, but then neither are the straight couples like in Hallmark movies. Like that's kind of a hallmark of those movies and stuff. So it feels like we've made it as sort of queer people to have our own shitty movies in a lot of ways, and that's part of
Yeah,
why I
I can
enjoy
appreciate
it.
that
Yeah.
narrative. Like, hey, not every movie about queer people needs to be Oscar baity. Like, maybe we can
Yeah.
just also have queer bad movies. Uh,
Yeah.
and I guess I should mention the category that we're maybe talking about now, if
Mhm.
this isn't like too arbitrary of a label, is like background movies.
Mhm.
Movies that are good to have on while you're cooking dinner. And as that, it really works for me because it's a dumb, silly Hallmark
Mhm.
movie that you can have on in the background while you're cooking dinner. And if your mom happens to walk in to help you peel the potatoes, it is kind of reinforcing the idea that, hey, queer and lesbian couples are just couples. Like it
Yeah.
normalizes that notion. So I definitely appreciate that. But it felt to me like very much a movie about gay people for straight people.
Yes.
And maybe that's
Uh
what it needs to be for my
yeah.
mom to watch it. I don't know. What do you think?
Yeah, I feel like that's accurate. And stuff. A lot We're still at a point where a lot of queer culture has straight people as the audience. In terms of like trying to make our existence palatable. And there's a
Mm,
lot of disagreements to be had about like whether or not we should be doing that or whatever. And stuff. But this is one that it is relatively inoffensive. When I saw it for the first time last year, I texted my sister-in-law with, this would be a fine one for you to show my oldest niece, who just turned 11. Um, and it's one of those things where it's just it's an inoffensive Christmas movie, which is good.
yeah, yeah. If
It's
you need
different.
one of those in your back pocket, this is a
Yeah.
good one to have because it does push a certain narrative. And
Mhm.
my feeling about it, like it's written by, or at least in part by, Clea Duvall, who is
Mhm.
just a icon of mine, uh,
Yes.
but who based it on her own true to life experience.
Mhm.
But I think it's kind of clear that it was true to life like 20 years after the fact in a lot of
Yeah.
ways. And so it, even when it first came out, it felt dated a
Mhm.
little bit, but maybe that's what you need for that background inoffensive sort of movie. So
Yes. Yeah.
maybe this is not the one to get all excited about and to all sit down on the couch for,
Mm-mm.
but it's got its place here, yeah?
Yeah. It's something to put on instead of football or some other random Christmas movie about straight people. Like
Mhm.
it's it's something new, which is refreshing in the middle of a season where like so much is repeated.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, when we're, I guess, talking about like classics that we've seen over and over again, your next movie is definitely in that category for me. So I
Mhm.
just love to have this on the background kind of any time of year. It might even be extra perfect when there's like family sort of around. But tell us about it.
Mhm. Yeah, this is one of my favorite queer comedies, but I'm a cheerleader. It is a comedy about conversion therapy, which feels like
Not easy to
such
do. That
no,
feels like a
no.
very tough phrase to
Yeah,
say.
but it does a good job of like laughing at these very painful things and making it into sort of this hijinks comedy of like, well, these people are under some very real pressure, but they are also experiencing and learning about themselves, and everything is so over the top that it becomes funny. And it's a good way for queer people to uh, laugh at the pain of some of these experiences in a
Hmm.
good way. And stuff. And it's a good like it does a really good job of like normalizing uh uh queer relationships while also like talking about how it's hard because there are these people in the world who think we're abnormal or something like that, and but these people end up happy and alive and in better situations. And stuff. I don't think it's spoiling anything to say that the movie has a happy ending, and stuff, which is good to see in queer movies.
Yeah, yeah, that's
Yeah.
definitely true. And it's a lot of fun, and there is a certain silliness to it.
Mhm.
But without wanting to like prop myself up as some sort of deep thinking art critic, I do really appreciate that idea that we talked about a moment ago of sort of exploring your fears through these like
Mhm.
outsized boogeyman characters. And
Yes.
this has that because the notion of conversion therapy is sort of dressed up into that archetype of the like mean head mistress in
Mhm.
such a way that I feel like anybody can relate to, even if they have never been to or been threatened with or been afraid of going to like a conversion camp.
Mhm.
I think we've all had that sort of like camp boarding school type experience with the asshole in charge, and
Yeah.
there's a relatability there.
Yeah, and there's also a lot about how like men and women have these special roles and stuff, and there was one point where one of the very effeminate men there just goes, "I wasn't meant to be a butch." And it's this thing about like performing this masculinity for others and learning how to be not toxically masculine in a lot of ways. And not like you don't have to be overtly feminine. One of my favorite jokes in the movie is the character of Jan, who is just simply gender nonconforming. She's not actually gay. She says so in the movie, but she's been sent to this camp because she's not your typical woman. And so it's a sort of like wanting to teach people how to be a woman and sort of lampshades that concept that like society has of telling people that, oh, you have to, in order to be a woman or a man, you have to be this way or that way. And stuff when it's really just fine to be yourself.
Yeah. Do you feel like this is something that you can like readily get away with when it comes to family? The the aesthetic, I think, has
Yeah.
a certain appeal. How
Yes. Yeah.
difficult of a pitch would this be, you think?
To some family, probably not too hard of a pitch, and stuff, especially, like, I come from a very conservative family, so, like,
Mhm.
it's very dependent upon, like a movie that acknowledges the existence of queer people, let alone lampshades, sort of Christian conservative therapy, would not pass with them. But if you've got a family that is queer friendly, that makes jokes about gender and stuff like that, like they would probably love this movie if they haven't seen it already. And so
Yeah, and
like, or
I
if,
almost
yeah,
wonder how many folks listening might be able to get this one in under the radar before anybody realizes that
hmm,
it's farce. You know,
yeah,
before anybody realizes like there's a enough about it that's sort of extreme and out there and
hmm,
ungrounded, so that you don't even necessarily know that you're being lampooned as the like ultra conservative Christian until you get fairly deep into it in certain ways.
yeah, yep. And I would also want to watch it just to see who recognizes RuPaul.
Yeah, that's fair. That's a good pitch in and of itself. A lot of young talent in that one.
Yeah, yep. Yeah, the thing that I went and rewatched it this week. It's free on YouTube,
Hmm.
which was a surprise. Um and that's not like, it's not like a pirated thing. It's actually like
Right,
a
like it's
YouTube movie. Yeah,
actually
yes.
available on
Yeah.
YouTube.
So, but like one of the like jock actors is Dante, who did the voice of Zuko in Avatar: The Last Airbender. I forget his last name, but his first name is Dante. And he, like, when he showed up, I was like, "Oh, hey!" Like, I recognize that young guy. Um, and so it has a lot of those moments too, where you're like, "Oh, this has a cast of like a bunch of like queer Hollywood, or like just young Hollywood at the time." So
And a totally banging soundtrack for
yes.
the 90s like pop punk
Hmm.
emo type stuff that works really well in the background.
Yep.
Uh, I'm just going to mention briefly. My quick pick is maybe a little bit of a tougher sell in a lot of ways, but it's got similar aesthetic musically, and it's just sort of a lot of fun as a good background movie. Certainly, I think people watching it will likely be familiar with Hedwig and the Angry Inch, but it might be one of those movies like Rocky Horror or some of those
Hmm.
cult classics that you've spent more time saying that you've seen than have
Hmm.
actually spent seeing it. And I really want to recommend, if you have been sort of on the fence, if you've been waiting, don't. Like, it holds up. It is a good time. The music is legitimately solid, and it's
Hmm.
got a lot to say. There is a maybe loudness or a crassness to it that is kind of the perfect anecdote for a lot of the things that we've been talking about, like a lot
Hmm.
of the really cloying, saccharine sweet type of Christmas bullshit. Hedwig and
Hmm.
the Angry Inch will cut through that like
Hmm.
a rock opera with an attitude, and is definitely something worth checking out.
Yeah, absolutely. That is one of those queer movies that I have not yet seen, but I need to, and I think you just sold me on it.
Yeah, well done.
Yeah.
All right. Well, they say if you can reach just one person, that it was all worth it. So
Yes.
I am proud to be here with you tonight.